Don't be confused with yourself. You never actually failed. What you did was try once, it didn't work, and then you stopped doing it entirely. And somewhere in the distance between the failure and the stopping, you made a decision which you maybe haven't even fully acknowledged or even acknowledged at all yet. You decided that that was the evidence about you. You decided that what happened was the evidence about you as a person, about your capacity, about your sustainability, or your will and right to keep going, rather than the evidence about the attempt itself. You took one singular data point and built a conclusion out of it, which you have been living inside ever since that moment. And that conclusion itself is the failure, not the failure of the actual task you were trying to succeed in. Samuel Beckett spent so many years being rejected as a writer. Publishers returned so many of his manuscripts, and critics ignored the work that actually did get through of his. He wrote in two different languages, being English and French, partially to strip the prose of his comfort of familiarity, and then also to make the writing harder for himself on purpose. His most performed play, which is Waiting for Godot, was rejected by every single major London theatre before it was ever staged, and it is now one of the most significant works in the history of Western drama. How crazy is that? He wrote a line that survived everything since that moment. Ever tried, ever failed, no matter, try again, and fail better. That line isn't some sort of motivational script that you find on the wall of a gym. No, you have to read it again without any sort of poster that it's been printed on. What it is a description of the honest relationship that a person can have with their own limitations. And it's not that the failure itself is fine, because obviously you don't want to fail in life. It's not that failure itself doesn't cost anything. That failure is the terrain. That is the whole point. Failure is the path that you have to walk upon. The alternative to failing is not succeeding. It is instead not being in contact with reality at all. The person who has never failed at a single thing in their entire life has never tried anything that actually mattered. That is just a fact. They have been sitting on the rock. They've been thinking, just sitting like the thinker, not actually acting. They've been planning, they've been preparing, they've been confusing the activity of preparation with the act of living. Aristotle as well made a distinction that is worth sitting with here. Potential is not the same as actuality. A seed has the potential to become a tree. That is the truth. But potential unrealized is just potential. It doesn't feed anyone, it doesn't grow into anything, it just simply remains as potential, as possible, as intact, as some sort of entirely theoretical object. The person who tried something once and then stopped has so much more in common with the untouched seed than they do with the person who failed 1,000 times or 100 times and kept going and kept failing. Because at least the seed itself has not yet made the choice to stop. You yourself, however, did make that choice. You are not the seed. You have complete ultimate choice to stop or to continue going. And here is what actually stopping after one failure means. It means that you decided that the evidence from that singular attempt, or maybe even two attempts if you want to give yourself the benefit of the doubt, was sufficient enough to close the entire case of your life. That a single result, a single round, a single rejection, or a single project that did not land, or a single relationship that did not hold, was enough data to determine the outcome of your entire life, of everything that would have come after the fact. You ran one singular trial and decided that the experiment was completely done. Obviously, that's not how trials work. You see in science, you see in peer-reviewed studies that they run hundreds of trials, thousands of trials. They have so many different distinctions between trials because you cannot disclose data after one trial. No scientist would ever accept that methodology of just a single trial. No serious person in any field would look at a single failure and conclude that the endeavor itself was impossible. They would just conclude that the trial was unsuccessful. Yet, for some reason, this is exactly what most people do with their lives. They try once and it doesn't work immediately, and then they stop for some reason. And then they spend the rest of their time explaining the stop as if it was the only reasonable outcome or reasonable response to what happened, instead of justifying trying again. I'm here to tell you that it wasn't. It was not reasonable at all. It was not justifiable. You need to continue trying. Albert Camus wrote that one must imagine Sisyphus as happy. The man who was condemned to push that boulder up the hill forever. The guy in the photo pushing the rock, blah, blah, blah. He would watch the rock or the boulder fall back down every single time he reached the peak. And then he would just have to push it again. That's what he was condemned to his entire life. And it's not because the task of pushing the boulder up the hill was meaningful or conventionally successful in any sense, but instead because pushing was the only honest response to a reality that does not guarantee any sort of outcome for Sisyphus. The alternative, which was refusing to push the boulder and sitting at the bottom and explaining why the hill was too steep or the boulder was too heavy, was not freedom for Sisyphus. What it was just a different kind of condemnation. Is that even a word? It was just a different kind of life that he was trapped in. Either he could push or he could sit at the bottom. Either way, he would exist. The fall did not stop you. The failure did not stop you. You stopped you. And the distance between those two things is the entire argument. That's the entire video. The distance between you trying again in the future and you stopping again if you fail one more time is the whole point. The fall was real. That is undeniable. The failure is a genuine thing that affected your life. It cost you something. Again, that's undeniable. And it may have genuinely been difficult for you. But none of that is being minimized when I say to you that you must just continue and keep trying. The fall does not make the decision. You make the decision. In the silence after the failure, in the space where the next attempt would have lived on, you chose the explanation over the continuation. Beckett didn't call it fail and stop. What he did was call it fail better. Better as in the next failure is more refined than the last, not that you have to succeed the next trial. The next failure must be more informed. The next failure must have more data points for you to build upon, more specifically targeted at the exact place that the work itself needs to go. Failure as a calibration tool rather than a verdict. You get the verdict. You choose where the verdict goes. You are the jury to your own life. You were supposed to get the data from the failures so you could be the jury, so you can make that verdict. So I want you to go out there and I want you to keep failing until that failure becomes success.